a hiker goes missing in the Wyoming wilderness. For 29 days, no one can find him. Then, a lone backpacker stumbles upon something unbelievable. A man sits motionless on a boulder, overlooking a lake. When the hiker gets closer, he realizes it's the missing man. And the story of how he survived alone for nearly a month before writing his final words will break your heart. On the afternoon of August 2nd, 1998, Mike Turner, a towering hiker standing at 6 feet 6 inches, paused momentarily, reaching into his backpack to retrieve his water bottle. At 48 years old, Mike had ventured deep into the Fitzpatrick Wilderness in Wyoming, standing at an elevation of 11,000 feet, surrounded by a dense grove of trees on the mountainside. He tilted the bottle to his lips, savoring the cool refreshment as he surveyed the breathtaking landscape around him. The Fitzpatrick Wilderness is a realm of extraordinary contrasts, where jagged, snow-capped peaks rise to 13,000 feet, glaciers glisten under the sun, and below them, verdant meadows flourish with wildflowers, tall grasses, and flowing streams teeming with wildlife. The sheer beauty of this untouched expanse makes it seem almost surreal, as if it were a scene from a fantasy world. In fact, photographs of the region often appear so stunning that they seem digitally altered. Unlike many other wilderness areas, Fitzpatrick remains largely undisturbed due to its inaccessibility. Only seasoned outdoor enthusiasts, like Mike, dared to navigate its treacherous terrain. While many might consider venturing off established trails reckless, for an expert navigator like Mike, it was simply part of the adventure. Though hiking was his passion, Mike's primary occupation was quite different. He served as a reverend at a Christian church in Idaho, a role he had embraced for a decade. His work was fulfilling but demanding, often leaving him mentally and emotionally drained. For him, nature was a sanctuary, a place where he felt a deeper connection to his faith than even within the walls of his church. The vast, untouched wilderness seemed like a divine masterpiece, reinforcing his belief in a higher power. This particular expedition had been meticulously planned for over a year. It was intended to be a solo 9-day, 60-mile trek through the wilderness, an opportunity for solitude and reflection. Despite his extensive experience, Mike understood the inherent dangers of solo hiking. The greatest risk was the very nature of being alone. If an emergency arose, there would be no one to call for help. Cell phones, at that time, were rudimentary and unreliable in remote regions. To mitigate these risks, Mike had drawn out a detailed route on a topographical map, marking the exact coordinates of his intended path. He entrusted this map to his wife, Diane, an experienced hiker herself, ensuring that she knew precisely where he planned to be each day. They agreed that she would meet him at a designated point on the 9th day at noon, where she would pick him up and bring him home. However, on the 4th day of his journey, as he took that sip of water, Mike made a crucial decision, one that no one else knew about. Accompanying him on this adventure was a dog, the family's black Labrador mix, a spirited and devoted hiking companion. Over the past day, Mike had noticed that the dog was struggling. The high-altitude terrain, with its patches of jagged ice, had taken a toll on the dog's paws, leaving them raw and sensitive. By the morning of the 4th day, the dog's usual boundless energy had waned, and he limped along, whimpering in pain. Realizing that continuing along his planned route, one that traversed even more icy stretches, would be too grueling for the dog, Mike made a tough call. He decided to take a detour, skirting around the mountains to avoid the icy terrain. This alternative path would extend his journey by at least a day, but it would lead to the same final meeting point where Diane would be waiting. Mike was fully aware of the risks of altering his route. Not only would his family have no idea where he was, but he would also be in an area that search and rescue teams wouldn't be looking if anything went wrong. However, he was prepared. He had brought extra supplies for unforeseen circumstances. Confident in his navigation skills, he believed he could handle the change without issue. After finishing his sip of water, Mike knelt down and poured some into a small collapsible bowl for the dog. The dog eagerly lapped at the liquid, his tail wagging slightly, a sign of relief. Watching his companion, Mike reassured himself that he had made the right decision. Just as the dog finished drinking, his ears perked up. In an instant, He bolted into the dense foliage, vanishing into the trees before Mike could react. While the dog occasionally wandered off during hikes, this situation was different. They were deep in the backcountry, in an area where veering off course could lead to serious consequences. If Mike had to chase after the dog, he risked getting disoriented, running into dangerous wildlife, or even injuring himself on the rugged terrain. Without hesitation, Mike grabbed the empty bowl and sprinted after his dog. Pushing through the trees, he emerged on the other side and was met with a striking view, a sloping expanse leading down to a pristine lake. The area was strewn with massive boulders, some as large as small cars, likely remnants of rockfalls from the surrounding peaks. The dog had already made it halfway down the slope, heading toward the lake, oblivious to Mike's frantic calls. The only way for Mike to reach him was to navigate across the boulders, leaping from one to the next. With no other choice, he climbed onto the nearest rock and began carefully making his way toward the dog. A week later, on August 9th, Mike's wife, Diane, stood at the agreed-upon meeting spot. Accompanied by their 3 children and a group of friends, she anxiously checked her watch. Mike was nowhere to be seen. The family had been waiting since the previous day, August 8th at noon, the exact time he was supposed to arrive. At first, no one was overly alarmed. Given the unpredictable nature of the wilderness, delays were always a possibility. However, as the hours stretched into an entire day, worry began to creep in. Before setting off on his journey, Mike had given Diane clear instructions. "If I don't arrive by August 9th at 4 p.m., call for help." As the afternoon sun began to wane, Diane hesitated. She knew that initiating a search and rescue operation was a massive undertaking. What if Mike was just delayed? What if, the moment she reported him missing, he emerged from the trees with an apologetic grin? Despite these thoughts, when the clock struck 4:15 p.m. and there was still no sign of her husband, Diane made the difficult decision. The next morning, August 10th, she contacted authorities and reported Mike missing. A massive search was launched. However, there was one crucial problem. No one knew that Mike had changed his route. Rescue teams meticulously combed the wilderness, but they were searching along the wrong path, one that Mike had abandoned days earlier. And in a place as vast and unforgiving as the Fitzpatrick Wilderness, even the most experienced rescuers knew that finding a single lost hiker was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Visibility was severely limited, whether from the sky, the ground, or deep within the wilderness. Some areas were completely inaccessible. The environment itself posed threats, with lurking predators making it an incredibly risky endeavor. Despite extensive efforts, including helicopters scanning from above, mounted search teams navigating the terrain, and hundreds of volunteers combing every inch of the forest, not a single trace of Mike was discovered. After 2 weeks of relentless searching with no results, authorities were left with no choice but to halt the operation. Mike's family was devastated. The uncertainty of his fate weighed heavily on them, leaving them in a state of unbearable grief and confusion. Fast forward 5 days after the search had officially ended. On August 28th, 2 backpackers ventured deep into the Fitzpatrick Wilderness, a staggering 17 miles from the last confirmed sighting of Mike Turner. Notably, this wasn't where he initially veered off into the treacherous boulder field. This was much farther away. These hikers were well aware of Mike's disappearance. Flyers and alerts had been plastered all over town, at the entrances to various trails, and throughout the surrounding wilderness. As they took a break from their trek, an exhausted, skeletal-looking black Labrador limped out from the dense tree line. The dog, barely able to stand, whined softly, its ribs visible beneath its thin coat. It was the dog, Mike's loyal companion. The hikers instantly recognized him from the missing person posters. Knowing the dog was in distress, they coaxed him closer using granola bars and water. The dog devoured the food and slowly regained some strength. Miraculously, despite his condition, he survived and would go on to make a full recovery. After securing the dog, the hikers immediately alerted authorities. When Mike's family received the news, their emotions swung wildly, from anguish to a glimmer of hope. If the dog had made it out alive, perhaps Mike had too. Maybe the dog could even lead them to him. A new search was promptly organized, this time with the dog as their guide. Volunteers and family members followed him back into the forest, praying he would take them straight to Mike. Meanwhile, in an entirely different part of the Fitzpatrick wilderness, a solo backpacker, let's call him Brian, was making his way up the rugged landscape, unaware of the unfolding search efforts. While Brian wasn't involved in looking for Mike, he had seen the missing posters at various trailheads before setting off on his own journey. After days of trekking alone through the vast wilderness, Brian reached a dense patch of trees roughly 11,000 feet up a mountainside. As he emerged from the thick foliage, he was met with a breathtaking sight: an expansive boulder field sloping down to a pristine lake, framed by distant mountain peaks. However, the awe-inspiring view wasn't what caught his attention. Across the rocky expanse, perched on a boulder with his back turned to him, was a lone man staring at the lake. In such a remote area, encountering another person was unexpected. Curiosity and concern compelled Brian to approach. As he drew closer, realization struck him like a lightning bolt. The man sitting on the rock was none other than the missing hiker, Mike Turner. And what Mike had endured over the past 29 days was nothing short of extraordinary. To understand his ordeal, we need to rewind to the moment he lost sight of the dog in the treacherous boulder field. As Mike pursued his dog, he hopped from rock to rock, trying to close the gap. Initially, everything seemed manageable. He called out to the dog, urging him to stay put while carefully navigating the uneven terrain. Then disaster struck. Mike landed on a particularly unstable boulder, which wobbled beneath his weight. Instinctively, he attempted to leap to a nearby rock, but his jump fell short. Instead of landing securely, he slammed against the rock's surface and tumbled into the narrow gap between two massive stones. At first, he thought he was fine, until he realized the unstable boulder behind him had begun shifting. With terrifying speed, the 800-pound rock rolled forward, colliding with another boulder and trapping Mike's legs in between. He wasn't crushed, nor were his bones broken, but he was effectively shackled in place. The natural contours of the boulders had locked around his lower legs, making escape impossible. Panic surged through him. He tried everything, using his gear, a makeshift lever, even brute force, to shift the enormous rocks. But no matter what he did, they refused to budge. 2 agonizing hours passed before the grim reality set in. He was stuck. No amount of strength or strategy would free him. His only hope was that someone would find him. Determined to stay composed, he pulled out his journal, a book he had brought along to document his spiritual reflections, and began writing. He chronicled exactly what had happened, how he had ended up trapped, and the challenges he now faced. His words reflected his deep faith, placing his fate in divine hands. "I am in your hands, Lord. I don't know what I may face," he wrote, acknowledging the uncertainty of his situation while trusting in something greater than himself. As night fell, the wilderness turned frigid. Temperatures plummeted from over 100 degrees during the day to near freezing. Mike wrapped himself in his sleeping bag, melting snow for water and draping his tent flap overhead for insulation. Survival mode had fully kicked in. Day 2 brought fresh fears. His greatest concern? The possibility of needing amputation if circulation to his legs was lost. He estimated he had enough food for about a week, but only 2 quarts of water, far from sufficient. Desperate, he attempted to throw his water bottle, tied to a rope, into the nearby lake to collect water. Fell just short. As he reeled it back in, the bottle became wedged between rocks, just out of reach. Trapped and unable to move, Mike had no way to retrieve the water bottle wedged beyond his reach. By the time the second day ended, the tone of his journal had begun to shift. Though not entirely bleak, there was a clear undercurrent of worry. He speculated about what would happen once he ran out of water, even making a dark joke about attempting to improve the taste of his urine with a flavored drink mix. On the surface, it was humor, but beneath it lay the realization that his situation was dire. No one knew where he was. He was completely off course, and he had no way of signaling for help. Day 3 arrived, and Mike once again wrote in his journal. Strangely, his tone seemed a little more hopeful. Despite his dwindling water supply, down to his last quart, he reflected on why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. His goal had been to deepen his connection with God, and in his mind, that mission had been fulfilled in a way he had never anticipated. He wrote about his faith being tested and the personal transformation he believed he was undergoing. He imagined the lessons he would take from this experience, how he would return home as a better father, husband, and reverend. Beneath it all, there was still a quiet belief that he would survive. But the days dragged on and no help arrived. His hope gradually eroded. By the 5th or 6th day, Mike noticed something terrifying. His left leg had gone completely numb. Though he had accepted his predicament as serious, this new development ignited fresh panic. In his journal, he detailed the growing horror of knowing his body was beginning to break down. His faith wavered, and resentment seeped into his words. He questioned whether this was some form of punishment. Had he failed in some way? If God was with him, why was he still suffering? Why had no help come? Then, in what was perhaps the most gut-wrenching entry, he wrote a single devastating sentence. "So lonely, more than I imagined." The weight of those words was immeasurable. He wasn't injured. He wasn't unconscious. He was fully aware of his situation, trapped in silence, with nothing but his thoughts and the slow realization that he was vanishing from the world, completely unseen. His family had no idea where he was. No one did. The isolation was unbearable. By day 6 and 7, his journal slipped from his grasp, landing just beyond his reach. With no way to retrieve it, he began scrawling messages on anything available: his pocket Bible, the margins of his stove's instruction manual. His writing became more erratic, his thoughts growing darker. He chastised himself for choosing the longer route, cursing the decision that had led to this nightmare. He still pleaded with God, but his frustration bled through, his desperate cries unanswered. Regret consumed him. He had set himself up for this, and now there was no way out. Then, as his body weakened, so did his writing. By day 8 or 9, it became barely legible. He was slipping away. His final thoughts were of his family, his children, his wife. He imagined their futures, knowing he wouldn't be there to see them grow. In the last words he managed to form, he let go of his anger. He stopped questioning God's plan. Instead, he accepted it. He prayed for peace. "Fill me with peace, Lord. May my condition not deny my love for you." Then came his final note: "I am ready to go, though I miss my family." Barely able to hold his pen, he managed to sign off with a simple, heartbreaking farewell. "Love, Dad." With what little strength he had left, he removed his wedding ring and placed it on the rock beside him. He knew that when his body eventually gave way to nature, the ring would slip from his bones and be lost forever. He didn't want that. He wanted his family to have it. Then he prepared for the inevitable. Days later, as Brian, the lone hiker, approached the figure seated motionless on the boulder, recognition struck him like a blow to the chest. The missing person flyers he had seen before entering the wilderness. This was him. This was Mike Turner. Realizing there was nothing he could do, Brian carefully covered Mike's body and retrieved his wallet, ensuring authorities would be able to identify him. Then he began the long, grueling trek back to civilization. It would take him nearly 3 days to reach help. That alone underscored just how deep into the wilderness Mike had been when he perished. Meanwhile, the dog, the loyal black Labrador, continued leading the second search party, though he ultimately didn't reach his owner before Brian did. When authorities examined the path the dog had taken, it was clear. He had been heading straight toward Mike's location. He had never stopped trying to find him. He just hadn't made it in time. And then, to add another layer of heartbreak to this already devastating story, on the very day Mike left for his journey, his wife Diane received an unexpected delivery, a bouquet of flowers. Mike had arranged for them to be sent in advance, knowing they would arrive after his departure. Attached was a handwritten note meant to reassure her while he was away. "Thank you for letting me live this adventure. Know that wherever I am and whatever I'm doing, I'm thinking of you." If this story gave you chills, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We have more unbelievable true survival stories coming soon. And let us know, what would you have done in Mike's place?